Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Elica Le Bon.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you with us. You have become something of a social media phenom lately. I want to talk to you about that in a minute. But first, maybe just for our audience, just tell them a little bit about how you got here. You're an Iranian-American, and you've taken some very tough stances. But what's the background? What has informed your tough stances that we're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, technically, I'm an Iranian-British-American lawyer. What has informed my stances, I guess, would be my history, of course, my family's history in Iran. My family having, been in Iran during the 1979 coup, where the Islamic regime took over Iran, and witnessing the horrors of that, and witnessing, my family having been in Evin prison, my family having been executed, my family having been tortured by the regime. I think so much of what you come to understand growing up with a family that has had these type of experiences is the way that jihadists present themselves to the world versus who they actually are, which is actually something not to go on a tangent, but this is exactly what Wei Wang wrote about when he came out of prison in Iran, after all the studying he had done in the West versus what he had discovered, to only find out actually the Western world's perception of the regime in Iran is completely flawed. And that is exactly what's informed the conversation that I'm bringing to the Western narrative now.
Yeah, you mentioned
Wei Wang. Wei Wang. He was
this is the Princeton PhD
correct.
student who's now working on the Hill. He's kind of reinvented himself. But let me just ask you. You mentioned the word jihadist as you speak about the Iranian regime. That's interesting because most people use that word primarily when they talk about Sunni jihadists. We talk about, Al-Qaeda or ISIS or the Taliban, or even maybe Hamas, but people don't usually refer to this regime as jihadist because it's Shiite. Why do you think that is the case?
I've never heard that distinction, to be honest. I've always used jihadist, and the experts that I've heard the term from also use jihadist. I don't think that there's a separation because at the end of the day, the goal is the same, right? The goal is the same, and when we're talking about what it is that the jihadists are aspiring towards, we're going back to the kind of Islamic revival movement inspired by Rashid Rida after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. We're talking about people who want to revive this concept of an oppressive state under Sharia law by any and all means, even if it involves invading sovereign nations and infiltrating their borders. So to me, the distinction between Shiite and Sunni is irrelevant. What's relevant is this distinction between a moderate and an extremist. And the extremist is who I refer to as the jihadist in furtherance of that revivalist movement.
Fully agree. I want to ask you, just if you would, to talk a little bit about the Iranian-American community. They obviously play an important role. We had a representative from Nufti on the program not too long ago, and we talked about the role that the Iranian-American diaspora can play here. Curious to get your thoughts on that as well.
So, even before October 7th, which was kind of when the Western world woke up to the Middle East, before that, a year before that was the Woman Life Freedom Movement after the death of Mahsa Amini, or I should say the killing of Mahsa Amini. For a long period of time, for the past 45 years, Iranians, both inside Iran and outside of Iran, have been urging the world to wake up to the true threat of the Islamic regime in Iran, which, as we know, is not contained to Iran. So I think this became the Iranian-American community has been so instrumental in the wake of October 7th in pushing this idea to the world that the Islamic regime is not just Iran's problem. And we've been saying this, right? And the reason it's not just Iran's problem is because of its proxies. Its proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Houthis in Yemen, Islamic Jihad, all of their proxies. which are for the purpose of asserting some degree of domination in the Middle East. And now, subsequent to these attacks, it's like it's really driving what the Iranian-American community has been trying to assert as part of this public conversation for such a long time, which is that the Islamic regime is not only a terrorist occupying force inside of Iran, but it is a threat to the broader Middle East. And this is the conversation that these are the pieces of the puzzle that Iranian Americans have been trying to put together.
And I think it's still an uphill battle. And I want to just ask about the Israelis here. Of course, the Israelis are the ones who are fighting all of these different proxies that you mentioned. They're fighting an Iranian strategy that we've widely identified as the Ring of Fire. This is the multiple proxy strategies. They have to fight the sort of tentacles of this octopus that is where the head is much farther afield in the Middle East. How do you think the Israelis are faring right now against these proxies? And should they be fighting the proxies versus fighting Iran itself?
So first of all, I would push back on the idea that it's an Iranian strategy or that it's Iran. I specifically refer to them as the Islamic regime because that is what they are. And I just want to quickly just tell the audience why I say that. One of the things that lends legitimacy to this illegitimate regime is to appropriate things that are legitimate. So, for example, Iran, a nationality, a country, is a legitimate thing. And so when it's able to call itself Iran or Iranian, people see that as legitimate. I think if we stick to the definition of what they are, which is a regime that is based on, its own personal revivalist Islamic principles, it's not able to legitimize itself through those words. So as to your question, how Israel is doing in response to this, I mean, Israel during this period of time, the world is clearly very much against Israel because it doesn't understand the bigger picture. The reality is that if Israel is able to remove these proxies from Gaza, from Lebanon, wherever it is able to remove these proxies from, to me, Israel is curing those countries of cancer. And that is something to be grateful for because these things are a cancer. They don't just come here and set up shop and, kind of mind their own business. They come, they spread, they kill until they assert total domination, not just within those borders, but within the region. Because the point of this pan-Islamism is that there must be one contiguous region. Okay, it's not that the existence of a Jewish state frustrates the Islamic hegemony in the region. Okay, so it's not self-containing. So the way that I see it is that if Israel is able to take out these proxies with the precision strikes that it's been doing so well at doing, it is effectively curing these regions of cancer. The head of the snake, I don't know what that's going to take.
Yeah, I don't know either. And we can talk about that in a minute. But I mean, let's talk about the U.S. response then, because the U.S. has been taking fire from some of these proxies, right? We've lost 3 servicemen in Jordan back in, I guess it was late January or early February. We have an entire waterway that has been shut down by another Iran proxy, the Houthis. They've shut down the Red Sea, which is essentially responsible for something like 10 to 12% of maritime trade around the world. We seem to have a problem here with a strategy of our own, I would argue, in Washington. I think we've been a hot mess. Would you agree with that assessment? And if so, what do you think the U.S. needs to do to right the ship?
I absolutely agree with that assessment. And I think that assessment has come from, I believe that strategy or lack of strategy, I should say, has come from a decades-long infiltration in the White House with the regime's lobby and, supporters of the regime. The problem is that the US right now is very weak. It is very weak, and the weakness of the US's strategy is exactly what undermines the US, and it is exactly the thing that the Islamic regime is assessing in doing the strikes that it's doing through its proxies, right? It sees Biden as weak. The reason it sees Biden as weak is that Biden doesn't enforce the pre-existing sanctions, okay? After Donald Trump left the JCPOA and applied the maximum pressure campaign, Biden seriously laxed on enforcing these sanctions to where Iran, the Islamic regime, was able to manufacture its highest oil exports in the past 5 years. And so when there are no consequences for their behaviors, when the US continuously shows the Islamic regime that it's not going to respond to its threats, then of course it's going to continue to do the same, right? So it's very difficult for me to say what exactly needs to be done, but what is clear is that there needs to be a strong and resounding response. In my personal opinion, this isn't just going to come from the US alone. This is going to have to be a concerted effort, not just with the US, but with European countries and with Western countries in general, not just Western countries, all freedom-loving countries or any countries that are opposed to jihadism, okay, including UAE, Bahrain, whatever it takes. There needs to be a concerted effort where there are maximum consequences and maximum penalties for any engagement in this attempted regional domination, to make it so that the jihadists really significantly rethink their actions, and not only rethink their actions, become significantly economically impaired. And then once they are significantly economically impaired and they have no support in the international community, that is when the Iranian people are able to rise up and take the regime out themselves.
And I want to talk to you. This is the last question for you here, as we're starting to run out of time. But the people of Iran are really our best weapon, right? I mean, we always talk about it here at FDD that we need maximum pressure on the regime. That means sanctions, and it means political and diplomatic isolation. It means, the credible threat of military force on the one hand, but the other part of it has to be maximum support for the Iranian people. And that's been missing, hasn't it?
This becomes the point of contention or the point of controversy, because when we talk about arming the Iranian people, this is where we get into the conversation that particularly the American left and particularly the the Western left are very allergic to, which is this idea of regime change that is driven by the Western world. They call this imperialism when there's regime change in the Middle East by the West. Now, this is kind of getting hung up on a technicality. It is the Iranian people that are taking out the regime. Aiding the Iranian people, arming the Iranian people is not imperialism, because it is an organically driven movement. Nobody is telling the Iranian people to do this. They want to do this themselves because they don't want this regime. They don't want this government. And not only that, let me add to the fact that we know that it was American involvement by way of Jimmy Carter that actually helped to bring this regime in, right? It actually, we've seen the exchanges between Khomeini and the White House, where Jimmy Carter helped to not only suppress the Iranian army, but distribute this anti-Shah propaganda that fomented this coup in 1979 in Iran. So, if you want to go down that road of there should be no American involvement, there should never have been any American involvement in bringing them there in the first place. So you cannot break it and then walk away from it. You break it, you've got to fix it. And that means supporting the Iranian people, even if that means arming them to take out this regime.
Yeah, and there are, of course, lots of other things that we can do besides arming them, providing them with communications, providing them with financial assistance, giving them intelligence. I mean, there's lots of ways to help beyond arming them, but arming them may in fact be the logical conclusion that we will need to arrive at some point, because what this regime is doing to the region cannot continue. Elica Le Bon, I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning in the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, stay informed and inspired. This is Djobnik signing off.